So there are two tools that I find absolutely invaluable whenever I'm coaching clients. One of those tools is the CliftonStrengths, and the other one is the Enneagram. Recently, I was coaching someone. We were going through their strengths, and I asked them a question. I said, what would you say your core values are? And she kind of was stopped in her tracks, and she thought, you know what? I don't think I've ever thought about that. Now, that really fascinated me, because I'm just going to dive into her strength set here. And I actually see this quite a lot. Here are the top 10 strength domains and themes that she has. Number one is ideation, then developer, intellection, empathy. But what grabbed my attention are these three. So she has a strong belief strength, activator, and responsibility. Now, all three of those are really connected to core values, especially belief and responsibility. Belief is a strength which is a doing strength. So it's an executing strength. So you can see it's here, it's a purple. So it's an executing strength. However, it's really connected to values and vision. And someone with a high belief strength will really see a lot of movement and a lot of ability to be able to move forward by having clarity around their vision and their values in particular. Same with activator. Those people that activator are very much doers, ready, shoot, aim kind of thing. But those are influencers, and they use values to be able to activate others, particularly if they've got relational strengths in their top 5 like she did. And then responsibility here, this is a big one with regards to values, because it's a bit like a permissions strength. People with high responsibility need to be able to feel like they have permission to say yes and no. And whatever they say yes to, they will follow through with. Generally speaking, if you've got belief along with responsibility, what I've noticed is they tend to really act very heavily on their value set. So when she said to me, I have no idea what my values are, that really surprised me because of these strengths. What also surprised me, or I guess what gave me a little bit more clarity, was the fact, and if we come out here and go down to this Enneagram, what also was quite intriguing was she was a 2. That made a little bit more sense, because being a 2, she would often sacrifice, because it's a giver and a helper, she would often sacrifice herself on behalf of others. And that's quite common for someone who's in a 2. So that began to give me a little bit more clarity as to, okay, there's probably a reason why, even though she's in her late 30s, there's probably a reason why she hasn't been able to really do the work of finding out her core values. If you're like her and you need a tool to be able to find out what your core values are, well, then we're just going to spend some time going through how we can use this exercise to find out our values. So let's first begin by looking at what are values. So values are not just a set of words. They're not just a set of principles that we hold by. They actually come in many different forms. The thing that is really important, or the value set that is really important for this particular person to be able to work out, are her core values. And these are values that are internal. They're true to her. Now, other people might share these same values, but core values are very much true to you, and they're pretty much immovable. Really strong core values will be things that you'd rather die before they disappeared. But we have other values that we also have to kind of live with or work with. There are 4 main different categories of value, and we can put them into this grid. And along the sides of the grid, there's external up top, internal down below, and then immovable and flexible. So these 4 different types of values will fall into this grid. The next one up here is lived values. Now, these are sometimes called permission to play values, whether it's in your family, your workplace, or even the culture and the community and the country that you grew up in. There will be lived values, permission to play values. If you grew up in a very strict family, it might be obedience is a value that is a kind of permission to play value. If you're not obedient, then you're not valued in that place. I live here in the UK. You could say that culturally speaking, one of the permission to play values is tolerance. But lived values are external values. If we want to be celebrated in a particular community, in a particular group, then we need to adhere by these lived values, permission to play values. Another set of values which are external but also flexible are stated values. Now, these are probably the weakest set of values that you have. They don't often tend to be held by everyone. They're not like permission to play values, so you don't upset people if you don't live by them, but they're stated. And so a lot of companies will have stated values, but they're not really values that are lived out, but they're stated, they're plastered on the wall, and we say, yes, we value these things. So that's what a stated value is, and you can see how that's dynamically opposite to a core value. One of the struggles that we often do when we go into looking at values is we actually start talking about stated values or lived values, because those are the ones that are most external. Those are the ones that we see. Those are the ones that we easily relate to because they're always around us. It's these internal values, either the core or aspirational, that we might not be so aware of, particularly if we've just always been all about helping the others. Like a 2 on an Enneagram. Right, aspirational values, these are things that you wish you had. They're values that are really, really attractive to you, but they're probably not core. You can see that this orange line here represents all the value sets that you'll potentially have. Now, these core ones are the ones that are most important to us. But let's get back to the aspirational. Aspirational values, let me think of an example. It could be health, eating well. It's an aspirational value because you probably don't do it every single day, all the time. So aspirational values are different from core values because they tend to be flexible. They're not always actually core to who we are. I'm going to work through another separate exercise here to help this person be able to discover what their core values are. So let's go out and head down to this worksheet. If we're working through our core values, here is some helpful steps. Now, there are 7 steps, and this actually is pretty hard work to go through them all. So if you're following this, and you want to kind of go step by step, definitely watch all the way through, get an idea of what's involved, and then go back and then go through the steps, step by step. So this very first one, and this is kind of a precursor to being able to go through the work and really, really find out what your core values are, is to adopt a beginner's mindset. Now, I'll dive into what I mean by a beginner's mindset, but the reason why that's so important is because we shouldn't fall into shoulds or oughts. Remember what we talked about with regards to these other sets of values? Shoulds and oughts will move us into lived, stated, or aspirational values. We're wanting to really kind of discover what our core values are. Okay, so shoulds and oughts will take us away from core values. So to really kind of stay and work through this exercise properly and find out our core values, the first step is to take on a beginner's mindset. A beginner's mindset is when we were beginners, we always had this natural mindset. And the tendency is, particularly as we get older, we get wiser, we kind of begin to lose the beginner's mindset. And it's really like thinking like a child. So let's go through another tool here that works through all the different areas of what it takes to take on a beginner's mindset. So let me just go through these real quick. So a beginner's mindset, first thing is practice humility. I always really love the definition of humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less, in that you might want to learn something. Let go of preconceptions. That's the step number 2. Be present. Cultivate curiosity. Embrace uncertainty. Stay open to new experiences. Practice patience. Seek feedback. Maintain a positive attitude. Learn curiosity. Avoid comparing yourself to others, seek different perspectives, and back to practice humility. Those are 12 different steps. And one thing I challenge you to is when you wake up in the morning, decide that you're going to spend a whole 12 hours going through a beginner's mindset exercise. This is a really, really hard challenge. And if you wake up at 8, well, then start at number 8 and reach out to a few people and get some feedback on something that you think about. It might be through a text. When it gets to 9 o'clock, think about what does it take to maintain a positive mindset for the next hour at least, and so on and so forth, all the way through until 7 at night. So that's spending 12 hours as a challenge to relive like a child, to regain your beginner's mindset. So step number 2 is list your personal values. Now, I've written personal values because we don't know what our core values are yet. So we just want to kind of begin by just listing out as many values that we can think of. Now, this isn't easy, but what you need to watch out for are cultural norms. Okay, just falling into those ruts, falling into those mindsets that are just normal. Like, I want to value freedom, or I want to value wisdom. I want to value clarity. All those sort of things which are very kind of twee and a little bit corny. We want to think a little bit more broadly and more deeply. A Again, another tool that I recommend is just look up online and say list of values. Google it. I've got a list here, tons and tons of values, and it's alphabetically ordered. So you can see here, bliss is a belonging, connection, diligence, dignity, dominance. Okay, we got tons and tons of words here. Now, what you can do with a list like this, which is really helpful, is you can just go through each one and you can give a marking system, or you can just cross out the ones that don't apply to you. And what you'll end up with is a really, really long list. And that's great, because we want to list as many of your personal values out as we can. Because then the next step is we're going to group the list to watch out for. Don't overthink it and don't get too narrow, right? So group them and just keep it simple. So if there are certain values that you think, okay, this comes together under one word, or these kind of clump together, then that's great. Just group them together. Next step is quite straightforward. Name the group. Okay, so you've got a group that maybe come together like pleasure and fun and enjoyment. You've listed those three. They all come together under happiness or enjoyment. So you can just pick one of the words and you can use that as the name of the group. So what we're doing here is we're just refining. Then I want you to go into prioritizing the new list. So we've got the list of the groups and they've been named. The reason why I want you to prioritize them is because it helps you get thinking as to what are really core to you. Because what you want to end up with about no more than 5 core values and no less than 3. So somewhere between 3 and 5. Now, some people will say, well, I have 7. That's fine, but you can't generally remember more than 5, I found. Not easily, unless you put it in some really clever little way of remembering it, some sort of clever way to do that. When you're prioritizing, keep between 5 and 10. I put 10 here, but I recommend maximum 7. Minimum down to 3. If there's less than 3, I think, you haven't got enough values. It's highly, highly likely that by this point, you've already totally got value fatigue. And this whole exercise is like, okay, enough. That's really, really common and really, really normal. But I really urge you, don't give up. Just take a break. Even put it down for the rest of the day. Come back to it tomorrow, or come back to it on the weekend. Come back to it later. But don't give up on this process, because really figuring out what your core values are is an incredibly powerful tool. So if you've got the energy and you can keep going, after you've prioritized your new list, go down to step number 6, which is write a value context. So this is a little phrase. If you want, you can jump into ChatGPT or some other tool that can kind of help you. And if you're not just naturally good at writing words, those sort of tools can be really, really helpful. But it's got to be an action statement. If you say, right, you've come up with one of them, which is freedom. That might be one of your values. Write an action statement where I will engage freedom through ... and you list out a way in which you engage freedom. With an action statement, make sure there's a verb right before the value, and so that you can create like an action statement with that value. Or it doesn't even have to have the value in the phrase. So, for example, if you value cleanliness, your value context will, wherever I go, I leave a place better than I went in. Right? So that could be your value for cleanliness. So that's your context for that value. The reason why this is also really, really important is because it gives you phrases and a paragraph or a nice way for you to be able to express this core value to others. Values live within the context of culture, and culture lives within the way in which we communicate. Culture is made up by words in which we use. So if you can write a value statement, which is not a long, pithy, wordy paragraph, but it's actually just a sentence, just a phrase that really captures how you live out that particular value. When you've done that, and that's a lot of work and it's quite hard to do, go down into step number 7, which is test out these values. So don't be afraid that as you test out this value and as you get feedback from people who know you, they'll give you some pushback and you go like, is that really you? And you might think to yourself, well, this doesn't actually feel like it's me. It doesn't feel like, I feel like it's being forced. Well, you may have strayed into an aspirational value or into a lived value, a permission to play value, because you're just so used to kind of maybe pleasing people around you. Don't worry about that. Don't be afraid of starting over. Put a line through it and go back to number 2. Remember, it's all about having that beginner's mindset. You're always learning. Be patient. Don't worry about it. And only use what really, really works. So those are the 7 steps of being able to find out what your core values are. It's not easy, but it's really well worth the time. Thanks for watching.